Mara sat on the edge of her small wooden porch, staring at the horizon where the sun was slowly sinking behind the distant hills. The evening air was cool, carrying the faint scent of pine and the lingering smoke from the hearth she had lit hours ago. Her hands, roughened from years of work on the land, rested in her lap, idle for once. It was a strange feeling, this emptiness that had taken residence in her chest, heavier than any burden she had carried before. Her husband, Elias, had been gone for 6 months, claimed by the war that had swept through their village. She still sometimes expected to hear his familiar whistle as he returned from the fields, or the soft creak of the door as he stepped inside. But the house remained silent, filled only with memories and shadows. Grief had a way of reshaping a person, Mara thought. She had imagined that sorrow would diminish over time, like a wound slowly scabbing over. But her pain had only deepened, carving out a hollow inside her that nothing could fill. Nights were the worst. She would lie awake on the rough mattress, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind rustle through the trees outside, wishing she could somehow hear Elias's voice again. Sometimes she would whisper his name into the dark, hoping for an echo, a miracle, anything. Yet it wasn't only the loss of her husband that weighed her down. There was another quieter grief, one that Mara had carried in secret, tucked beneath layers of practicality and forced smiles. She had wanted children, a life that might have bloomed from love, laughter, and tiny hands grasping hers. But that dream was never hers to have. Mara had learned long ago that she could not bear children, a fact that had gnawed at her heart even before Elias's death. In those private moments, she often allowed herself to imagine the life she would never live, a home filled with the chaos of little feet, the gentle warmth of a child curled against her chest, the simple, grounding joy of guiding another soul through the world. Instead, her house remained quiet, her arms empty and her dreams deferred. Her sorrow was compounded by the judgment of others. The villagers, well-meaning in their own ways, often cast furtive glances, murmured words of pity or speculation. Mara had grown used to it, though it stung each time she felt it. In her solitude, she wrestled with a mixture of anger, sorrow, and resignation. She wondered if she would ever find purpose again, if her life would ever hold the kind of meaning she had envisioned before fate had intervened. She had tried to immerse herself in work, tending to the small garden behind the house, mending clothes, repairing the roof, and assisting neighbors in need. Still, each act of utility could not fill the void left by Elias, nor heal the wound of a childless life she had never had. It was on one such evening, as Mara sat in the quiet of her home, that she first saw him, a man of the Apache, traveling along the dusty path that cut through the valley. There was a presence about him, calm yet commanding, that immediately drew her attention. He did not intrude. He simply paused at the edge of her property, taking in the scene with eyes that seemed to see not just her form, but her soul. For reasons she could not articulate, Mara felt a flicker of curiosity, of cautious hope. Perhaps it was foolish, she thought, to expect solace from a stranger. Yet in her grief, any flicker of connection felt like a lifeline, a possibility she had long since stopped imagining. The evening deepened into twilight, and Mara remained on the porch, the sky streaked with hues of purple and gold. She did not know that this encounter would mark the beginning of a transformation she could never have anticipated, a shift that would challenge her understanding of family, loss, and love itself. But for now, she only felt the weight of her sorrow, heavy and unyielding, and the ache of dreams deferred, lingering in the quiet of her empty home. The next morning, Mara found herself stirring earlier than usual. Sleep had come fitfully, haunted by memories of Elias and dreams she could neither control nor interpret. She carried her grief like a cloak, thick and familiar, wrapping it tightly around her as she moved through the morning chores. The small garden behind her home required attention. The soil needed turning, the seedlings watered. But even these tasks felt hollow without the presence of someone to share the work, or the silence. Ayak had stayed at the edge of her property, quietly observing the house and the small plot of land, never intruding but always there. There was something about his calm, steady presence that made Mara uneasy, yet inexplicably comfortable. She had never met someone so clearly at ease with both himself and the world around him. In time, she found herself drawn to speak, as if the weight of her solitude demanded it. Finally, with the morning sun just beginning to gild the tips of the hills, Mara approached him. Her voice, soft and tentative, broke the stillness. I have something to tell you. Ayak turned his head slightly, his dark eyes steady, patient. Mara hesitated, searching for the words that had lodged themselves deep in her chest for so long. I can't have children, she said finally, the words trembling on her lips. She expected surprise, pity, maybe even a recoil, but his expression remained calm, unreadable, as though her confession were nothing more than a simple fact, neither tragic nor shameful. The air hung thick around them, charged with the gravity of unspoken things. Mara had carried this truth like a secret burden for years, first concealing it from her husband, then from the world. She had thought that the inability to bear children would define her life forever, marking it with a quiet sorrow no one could touch. Saying it aloud made the grief tangible, almost physical, and for a moment she felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't in years. Ayak's response startled her. Instead of pity or awkward silence, he simply smiled, a small, knowing curve of his lips. Good, he said. Mara's heart skipped a beat. Good? She echoed, incredulous, hurt flickering behind her eyes. He nodded slowly. Good. I've got enough kids for both. The words were simple, yet carried a depth she could not immediately grasp. Mara blinked, trying to reconcile her own despair with the unexpected lightness in his voice. What did he mean? Was this mockery or some strange kindness she could not yet understand? Seeing her confusion, Ayak continued, his tone gentle, almost like a song that unfolds slowly. Children are not only born of the body, they are born of care, guidance, and love. I have many children, enough to fill a house, a village, a life. There is room for more love and room for you in their lives. Mara's chest tightened. The concept was foreign, almost dizzying. She had spent so long thinking in terms of what she could not do, the life she could not have. Now someone was telling her that she could still matter, still give, still nurture. Not in the way she had imagined, but in a way that might be even more profound. She felt a flicker of hope, fragile and trembling like the first light of dawn creeping over the hills. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. Unbidden, but welcome. She had expected judgment, rejection, or at best, pity. Instead, she found understanding, an offer of inclusion in a life she had believed forever closed to her. In that moment, Mara realized that grief, though heavy, could also open the door to something new, something unexpected, and perhaps something beautiful. For the first time in months, she felt a spark of possibility. The world was not entirely empty. Her life, though altered, was not without purpose. And as she looked at Ayak, standing calmly in the morning light, she sensed that this encounter was only the beginning of a journey she had never imagined taking, but one that might yet bring her the family, the connection, and the hope she had thought lost forever. The sun had climbed higher by mid-morning, casting golden light across the valley and glinting off the tips of the surrounding hills. Mara lingered on the edge of the garden, her hands resting on the handle of the hoe she had set aside. The words Ayak had spoken the day before, good. I've got enough kids for both, kept echoing in her mind. She didn't understand them yet, but they stirred something unfamiliar, a fragile flicker of hope, a warmth she hadn't felt in months. Ayak approached her quietly, his movements deliberate and unhurried, as though the rhythm of the world itself guided him. There was a calmness about him, a serenity Mara could neither explain nor resist. His eyes, dark and steady, seemed to see not just her outward form, but something deeper, hidden beneath layers of grief and fear. Mara felt a strange mixture of caution and curiosity, a tension she hadn't experienced in years. He stopped a few paces away, tilting his head slightly, and smiled. It wasn't a casual smile, nor was it forced. It was layered, subtle, full of meaning, yet impossible to fully decipher. Mara felt her heart tighten. The expression carried reassurance, understanding, and a quiet kind of amusement, as though he saw the world differently and yet somehow perfectly in tune with her own pain. You look as though you carry the weight of the world on your shoulders, Ayak said, his voice calm and melodic, almost like the gentle flow of a river. There was no judgment in it, no pity, only an observation and a recognition of something she herself had barely acknowledged. Mara swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. I do, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I lost him, and I thought I could bear it. I thought I could move on, but some nights I don't know who I am without him. Her words trembled, raw and unpolished, as though speaking them aloud drained some of the burden she had carried in silence. Ayak's smile deepened, though it remained enigmatic. Grief is a teacher, he said, tilting his head. It shows us what we have loved, what we have lost, and sometimes what we are capable of giving, even when we think the well has run dry. Mara studied him, struck by the simplicity yet profundity of his words. She had expected clichés, empty sympathy, or hurried reassurances. But he spoke with the quiet authority of someone who had lived fully, who had seen the cyclical nature of life, and who understood the resilience of the human heart. You spoke of children yesterday, Mara ventured cautiously. I don't understand. How can you have enough for both? She feared the question might seem foolish, but something in his presence encouraged honesty, the kind of honesty she had denied herself for too long. Ayak's eyes softened. Children are not only those we bear, he said, a faint smile tracing his lips. They are those we guide, those we love, those we protect. My children are many, and they need guidance, need care, need love. There is room in their lives for someone who wishes to give, who wishes to nurture. Perhaps, Mara, there is a place for you here, not as a replacement, not as a substitute, but as a presence that can shape their lives with your heart and hands. Mara felt a shiver run down her spine. His words were not just comforting, they were revolutionary, turning her world upside down and offering a life she had not thought possible. The idea that motherhood or the nurturing of a family could exist beyond her own body was alien yet strangely liberating. She looked at him, searching for some hidden motive, some hint of judgment, but all she found in his mysterious smile was an invitation, patient and unwavering. In that smile, Mara sensed a bridge between her sorrow and the possibility of hope. Perhaps, she thought, the world was not entirely closed to her. Perhaps even in the shadow of loss there was room for love, and a family she had never dared to imagine. For the first time since Elias had died, Mara allowed herself to imagine a future. Not one she had planned, not one she had dreamed in the past, but one she could create. A life intertwined with Ahiak's children. A life where grief and hope could coexist, where the heart could expand instead of break. And in that moment, Ayak's smile remained, mysterious yet steady, a quiet promise that some losses could transform into new beginnings, if only one had the courage to step forward. The afternoon sun draped the valley in a warm, honeyed glow as Mara and Ahyak sat beneath the shade of a sprawling oak at the edge of her garden. Birds chirped softly in the distance, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and freshly tilled soil. Mara's hands rested in her lap, still tense from the confrontation with her grief earlier, but her eyes were fixed on Ahyak. She wanted to understand him, to grasp the meaning behind his words, but the depth of his quiet wisdom eluded her. Ahyak watched her with the same calm patience he always seemed to carry. Finally he spoke, his voice steady, almost musical, drawing Mara in as though she were a note in a larger melody of life. You wonder about my words, he said, about how I could have enough children for both of us. Mara nodded slowly, hesitant to interrupt. Yes, I don't understand how you mean it, or how I could fit into it. I can't bear children, and yet, you say it's enough? Her voice cracked slightly, revealing the rawness of hope she hadn't dared to feel in months. Ahyak smiled again, his eyes reflecting memories of distant hills and long journeys. I do not speak only of children born from the body, he said gently. I speak of children who need guidance, who need care, who need love. I have many children, yes, but everyone needs more than just me. They need hearts willing to teach, hands willing to help, souls willing to nurture. There is room, always room, for one more who wishes to give love. He leaned back slightly, letting his words hang in the warm air. I have watched my children grow, watched them stumble and rise again. I have seen the weight of the world press upon them, and I have seen them flourish when there is someone to walk beside them, to guide them without expecting perfection, to love them without reservation. Mara, that is where you can come in. That is where you can belong. Not as a mother in the way you once imagined, but as a presence that shapes lives through care, through attention, through love. There is enough of my children and enough need that one heart is never too few. Mara's breath caught. She had spent so long defining motherhood narrowly, tethered only to her own body, her own ability to give life. And now here was someone who challenged everything she had believed. A life could be shaped, a family could be built in ways she had never imagined. She realized that her grief had blinded her to possibilities. Her sorrow had narrowed the world, insisting that she could only experience motherhood in the one way she had lost. Tears pooled in her eyes, unbidden, as a new understanding dawned. She had mourned the children she could never bear, yet she had never considered the children she might yet nurture, the lives she might touch, the love she might give. Ahyak's words were a revelation. A family was not a fixed structure bound by biology alone. It was living, evolving, and its bonds could be forged through compassion, guidance, and presence. She looked at Ayak, searching for some hidden meaning, some glimmer of irony or jest. But his expression was solemn, patient, unyielding. He was not teasing her nor offering empty consolation. He was offering her a path forward, a way to heal and to matter even in the shadow of loss. Mara felt the weight of grief lift slightly, replaced by a fragile spark of hope. The house, once a silent monument to her sorrow, could now become a place of laughter, of teaching, of shared stories and tender guidance. Her life, though altered, could still bear fruit, not through what she had lost, but through what she was willing to give. For the first time in months, Mara allowed herself a small, cautious smile. Perhaps she could belong again. Perhaps she could nurture again. And perhaps, just perhaps, the absence she had feared would never be filled could instead be transformed into something new, something profound. Ayak's eyes met hers, steady and warm. In his mysterious smile, Mara glimpsed a promise. Grief need not define her, and love need not be limited. There was space for her in the lives of those around him, and enough of everything. Enough children, enough love, enough hope for both of them. The next morning, Mara followed Ayak along a narrow dirt path winding through the valley. The sun had not yet reached its peak, and the air was crisp, carrying the scent of wild sage and warm earth. Birds flitted through the trees, singing their unhurried songs. Mara's heart was both anxious and curious. She had agreed to see the children Ayak spoke of, though the idea felt surreal. She had spent so long imagining motherhood only as an impossibility, and now she was about to step into a world she had never dared to dream. Ayak moved with a natural grace, silent yet purposeful, guiding her through the small clearing where his children gathered. There was a rhythm to their lives that Mara immediately recognized, not the chaos she had feared, but a vibrant, living harmony. The children ranged in age, from toddlers clutching small wooden toys to older adolescents tending to the fields and livestock. Each child carried their own energy, their own voice, yet there was a unifying warmth in their interactions, a sense of belonging that was tangible. One of the older girls approached Mara first, her dark eyes wary but curious. "Are you here to stay?" she asked, tilting her head. Mara smiled gently, unsure how to answer. "I hope to help," she replied softly. The girl studied her for a moment longer, then nodded, seeming to understand in a way that transcended words. Ayak gestured for Mara to sit on a large, sun-warmed rock nearby. "These are my children," he said simply. "Each one carries a piece of the world, and each one needs guidance, love, and care. They will teach you as much as you teach them if you let them." As the day unfolded, Mara began to meet each child in turn. There was little Keo, a shy boy with a quiet curiosity who clung to her hands and asked endless questions about the plants in the garden. There was Layla, bold and mischievous, who tested Mara's patience with playful tricks but quickly warmed to her gentle laughter. The older boys, Tayan and Hakan, were initially skeptical, observing Mara with guarded eyes, but gradually accepted her presence as she helped them with the chores, showing competence and care rather than intrusion. What struck Mara most was not the number of children, but the depth of individuality in each of them. Each had their quirks, their fears, their strengths, yet all shared a connection to one another that was strong, unspoken, and enduring. She realized that Ayak's words were not exaggeration. He truly did have enough children, enough energy, enough life to welcome her into their fold. By mid-afternoon, Mara found herself laughing with the children, showing Keo how to plant seeds properly and helping Layla build a small toy from scrap wood. There was a rhythm to her movements, a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in months. The garden, once a solitary task, became a place of shared labor and shared joy. Mara felt a profound, quiet satisfaction in seeing the children respond to her guidance, to her care. Ayak watched silently from a distance, his mysterious smile ever present, as if measuring not her skill but her heart. Mara understood then what he had meant. Motherhood was not about biology. It was about presence, about nurturing, about shaping lives through care, patience, and love. The weight of her past grief, heavy as it had been, felt lighter in this new context. She could contribute, she could matter, and she could create bonds that transcended the loss she had carried. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, Mara stood in the center of the small clearing, watching the children run, laugh, and play. She felt a warmth in her chest that had been absent for far too long, a feeling of belonging she had thought was impossible. Ayak approached her, his eyes soft with understanding, and for a moment they stood in silence watching the children together. "You see now," he said quietly, "why I said there are enough children for both of us." Mara nodded, her lips curved into a smile that was equal parts wonder and relief. "Yes," she whispered, "I see." In that moment, the boundaries between loss and love, grief and hope seemed to blur. Mara realized that she had found a new family, not through birth but through presence, care, and the courage to embrace a life she had once thought forever closed to her. Days turned into weeks, and Mara found herself settling into a rhythm she had never imagined. The small clearing where Ayak's children lived became both her classroom and her sanctuary. She rose with the sun, helped with the morning chores, tended the garden, and joined in the teaching of the younger children. Slowly, she began to understand the gentle order and harmony in their lives, the way every task, every story, every ritual carried meaning beyond mere survival. At first, the differences in culture felt alien. Mara was used to the routines and customs of her own village, rigid schedules, quiet observances, and a certain adherence to propriety. In the Apache way of life, she found spontaneity and reverence intertwined with practicality. Songs accompanied the planting of crops, and lessons were taught not only with words but through actions, storytelling, and shared experience. Mara struggled at first to adapt, feeling clumsy in her attempts to follow their ways. But Ahyak never criticized. He guided her gently, offering small corrections with patience and encouragement. One afternoon, as Mara helped the children weave baskets from reeds collected near the stream, Ahyak sat nearby, watching. "You worry too much about doing things perfectly," he said softly. "The world is not measured in perfection, but in effort, in intention. The children feel your heart more than they notice your mistakes." Mara paused, holding a thin reed in her hand. She had been fretting over every uneven weave, every small imperfection. His words sank in slowly, a quiet balm to the perfectionist tendencies she had carried for years. She realized that care and presence mattered more than flawless execution, and that love could be expressed through participation, guidance, and patience rather than adherence to strict rules. As the days passed, Mara began to adopt small elements of Apache traditions. She joined the children in evening storytelling sessions, learning the myths and histories of the land. She discovered the rhythms of their songs, the symbolism in their dances, and the reverence they held for nature. Mara, in turn, shared pieces of her own heritage, the folk tales her mother had taught her, the recipes she had learned from her grandmother, the songs of her village. Slowly, a blending of worlds began to emerge, a weaving of cultures that felt natural and beautiful. Through these exchanges, Mara realized something profound. Family and belonging were not confined to a single lineage or tradition. The love she had longed to give, the nurturing she had thought impossible, could transcend boundaries. She could teach, guide, and protect, and in return she could learn, grow, and belong. The children responded eagerly to her stories, her laughter, and her guidance, and she felt a deep satisfaction in seeing them embrace her as part of their lives. Ahyak watched quietly, his mysterious smile ever present, as if measuring the depth of her transformation. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant streaks of red and gold across the horizon, he approached Mara. "You see now," he said, "how your presence matters. You are part of this family not because of birth, but because of love, effort, and care. This is the way of balance, between giving and receiving, between teaching and learning." Mara nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She had spent so long grieving the family she could not have, but now she saw that family could exist in many forms, and that belonging could be created through connection, respect, and shared life. The grief of her past did not vanish, but it became lighter, integrated into a new understanding of purpose and love. As night fell and the children drifted off to sleep under a sky painted with stars, Mara sat beside the fire with Ahyak, the crackling flames reflected in their eyes, a symbol of warmth, continuity, and shared life. She realized that her journey of grief and healing had led her here, not to a life she had imagined, but to one richer, fuller, and unexpectedly beautiful. In that quiet moment, Mara understood the true depth of Ayak's words. Love is limitless, family is chosen as much as given, and there is always enough heart for those willing to give it. She had found her place, and for the first time in months she felt a profound, unwavering sense of belonging. Weeks turned into months, and Mara found herself growing into a rhythm of life she had never imagined possible. The grief that had once defined her existence now seemed softened, like the rough edges of a stone worn smooth by time and care. Her days were full, not with the monotony of solitary chores, but with the vibrant, unpredictable energy of the children, the land, and the life she was helping to nurture. Mara began to see subtle changes in herself. The hesitation that had always shadowed her movements, the caution born of loss and fear, gradually gave way to confidence. She guided Ko patiently as he learned to tend seedlings, teaching him not only technique but the joy of creation. She helped Layla construct toys and small tools, laughing at her mischievous antics while offering gentle corrections. Even the older boys, Tayan and Hakan, who had once regarded her with skeptical eyes, now sought her counsel in small ways, testing her knowledge and appreciating her insights. More than skill, however, Mara was discovering the power of presence. She realized that her influence on the children went beyond instruction. It was in the way she listened, the quiet attentiveness she offered, and the gentle encouragement she provided. She learned to celebrate small victories, to comfort small defeats, and to let the children's curiosity and energy guide the lessons. The garden became not only a source of food, but a living classroom, and the clearing where they played transformed into a space of learning, laughter, and shared discovery. The most profound change, however, was internal. Mara had once defined herself by loss, the absence of her husband, the impossibility of bearing children. Now she measured herself by what she could give. She discovered that nurturing was not limited to biology. It was a matter of heart, commitment, and empathy. Each smile, each laugh, each moment of learning she witnessed became a small affirmation that her life still held purpose, that love could expand even when the world had seemed to close its doors. Ayak watched these changes quietly, always patient, always guiding without forcing. One evening, as the children gathered around a fire, he said softly, "You have learned something that many take a lifetime to understand. Family is not only born, it is made. It is a gift given freely and freely received. Your heart is full now, not because of what you were denied, but because of what you chose to give." Mara's eyes filled with tears, but they were not of sorrow. They were of a deep, tender joy. She looked at the children, scattered around the fire, faces illuminated by the flickering light, and felt an immense sense of connection. These were her children now, in a sense that went far beyond blood. She was shaping their world, guiding their growth and sharing in their triumphs and defeats. Her presence mattered, and in that realization she felt both strength and liberation. Even the landscape seemed to reflect her transformation. The once bleak garden now flourished under her care. Flowers bloomed in vibrant colors, vegetables thrived, and the clearing hummed with life. Mara found herself attuned to the rhythms of the land and the children alike, understanding that nurturing required both patience and spontaneity, structure, and freedom. She had learned to blend guidance with observation, teaching without imposing, loving without suffocating. By the time the sun set each day, painting the sky in streaks of crimson and gold, Mara felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She had become part of a living, breathing family, one that was chosen, built, and cherished. The grief that had once weighed so heavily on her chest had transformed into a quiet strength, a foundation for love that she could now extend outward. In this new life, Mara had discovered her true power, the ability to nurture, to guide, and to love unconditionally. She had stepped beyond the shadow of loss and into a light she had never imagined. And in that light, surrounded by children who now looked to her with trust and affection, Mara finally felt whole again. As the seasons shifted, Mara's presence in Ahyak's family became more than guidance and care. It became a bridge between two worlds. She had learned to move with the rhythm of Apache life, rising with the sun, following the natural flow of chores and lessons, and joining in the songs, stories, and rituals that shaped the children's understanding of their world. Yet she also carried the traditions of her own upbringing, the customs of her village, the songs her mother had sung, the stories her grandmother had told. At first, Mara hesitated to share her own culture. She feared it might clash with the Apache ways, or that her differences might disrupt the harmony she had come to cherish. But Ahyak's calm encouragement reminded her that life, like the land, thrived in diversity. "The heart can hold many truths," he said one evening, as they watched the children play under the fading sunlight. "Sharing your world does not diminish theirs, it expands it." Taking his words to heart, Mara began to integrate small pieces of her heritage into daily life. She taught the children her mother's songs, the melodies soft and lilting, weaving them into the Apache evening songs. She told folk tales of her village, stories of courage, kindness, and cleverness, and watched as the children listened intently, their eyes wide with wonder. Layla, once mischievous in her play, now repeated lines of the tales with pride, while Ko eagerly asked for explanations of the words and customs. At the same time, Mara immersed herself further in Apache traditions. She learned the deeper meanings of the seasonal rituals, the significance of certain plants and herbs, and the stories that connected the children to their ancestors. She discovered that these practices were not just routines but living teachings, guiding the children in understanding the world, the land, and themselves. She began to adopt these practices in her own life, blending them with her memories and customs, creating a personal rhythm that felt authentic and grounding. The garden, too, became a symbol of this fusion. Mara taught the children techniques she had learned from her village, ways to rotate crops, enrich the soil, and harvest efficiently, while Ayak guided them in traditional planting ceremonies and blessings. Together, they celebrated the harvest with songs, dances, and shared meals that combined flavors from both cultures. Mara realized that her own traditions had a place here, and the children's connection to their heritage became enriched by hers. Through this blending, Mara noticed subtle changes in herself and the children. The children developed a broader understanding of the world, learning that wisdom and beauty could be found in multiple ways of life. Mara, in turn, grew more flexible, her worldview expanding beyond the narrow confines of grief and past loss. She saw how connection could bridge cultural divides, how love could flow through shared experience, and how teaching and learning were reciprocal acts that deepened bonds. One evening, as the fire crackled and the children nestled close, Mara whispered to Ayak, "I never thought I could belong like this. I never thought my traditions could live here alongside yours and feel right." Ayak's smile, steady and full of understanding, met hers. "Belonging," he said, "is not about erasing differences. It is about honoring them, weaving them together, and creating something larger than any single part. You have found your place not by leaving your past behind, but by bringing it with you." Mara felt a deep warmth, a quiet satisfaction that had nothing to do with accomplishment or skill, but everything to do with connection. In blending traditions, she had created a richer, fuller life for herself and for the children. She was no longer just a visitor or a guide. She was part of a family, part of a culture in motion, part of something enduring. As the stars began to blanket the night sky, Mara watched the children sleep, peaceful and safe, and understood fully what Ayak had meant. Family, love, and belonging could transcend bloodlines, and the melding of worlds could bring a beauty she had never imagined possible. She was home, not in a single place or culture, but in the union of hearts, traditions, and lives woven together by care, respect, and love. The crisp autumn air settled over the valley, carrying the faint scent of falling leaves and damp earth. Mara walked through the garden, now flourishing with late-season crops, and paused to watch the children playing near the clearing. Their laughter filled the space, a melody that seemed to erase the echoes of her past sorrow. She realized, with a quiet astonishment, that the grief that had once consumed her was no longer a shadow that followed her everywhere. It had softened, reshaped by the life she had chosen to embrace, the love she had given and received. Mara thought of Elias, her husband, and the life they had once imagined together. She had mourned him, and she would continue to remember him, but her sorrow no longer defined her. It had become a part of her, like the roots of a tree, deep, unseen, supporting the growth above. She no longer felt trapped by the impossibility of bearing children. Instead, she understood that motherhood was not a single path, and that nurturing could take many forms. The children had grown accustomed to her presence, seeking her guidance, her comfort, and her stories. Each interaction, each shared moment had become a small affirmation of her place in their lives. Mara realized that she had been given a new kind of family, one that embraced her wholly, that needed her heart and hands even more than her body. In their eyes she saw trust, affection, and a recognition of her worth. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky with streaks of orange and purple, Mara sat beside Ayak. They watched the children gather firewood and prepare for the evening meal, moving with a sense of purpose and ease that mirrored the rhythms of life itself. "I never imagined it could be like this," Mara said softly. "I thought my life would be defined by loss, by what I could not give. But now," her voice faltered, caught in the swell of emotion she had long resisted. "Now I feel like I belong, like I matter." Ayak's eyes met hers, steady and warm. "Grief teaches us, Mara," he said gently. "It reminds us of what we have loved, and it prepares us for what we can give. Acceptance is not forgetting the past nor denying your pain. It is embracing it, learning from it, and allowing it to shape the love you offer in the present." Mara nodded, understanding fully for the first time. She could honor the life she had lost without letting it imprison her. She could grieve Elias and still nurture the children before her. She could carry her sorrow lightly, as a thread woven into the larger tapestry of a life renewed. The children ran toward her then, laughing, bringing freshly gathered sticks for the fire. Kao tugged at her sleeve, his dark eyes wide with excitement. "Teach us the story again, Mara," he pleaded. Layla and the older children crowded around, eager to join. Mara's heart swelled with a warmth that had been absent for too long. She smiled, inhaling the crisp evening air, and began to tell the tale, weaving her voice into the rhythm of the fire's crackle and the children's laughter. In that moment, Mara realized that healing was not a singular act or a sudden revelation. It was a process built from countless small moments of connection, care, and love. The grief that had once defined her was now a quiet companion, a reminder of life's fragility, but it no longer dictated her capacity for joy. She had found a new family, a new purpose, and a new sense of self, one rooted in presence, empathy, and the courage to embrace life fully. As the firelight flickered and the stars began to twinkle overhead, Mara felt a profound sense of peace. She was no longer just a widow defined by absence. She was a nurturer, a guide, and a vital part of a living, breathing family. The impossible had become possible, not through what she could have, but through what she chose to give. And in that acceptance, Mara found healing, not the erasure of grief, but the transformation of it into a life brimming with love, purpose, and belonging. The valley basked in the gentle light of dawn, soft mist curling above the fields and the garden that Mara had come to care for as her own. The children were already awake, their laughter and chatter drifting across the clearing as they prepared for the day's tasks. Mara paused for a moment, taking in the scene, and felt a quiet swell of gratitude and belonging. She had never imagined that life could feel this full, this alive, this shared. Ayak joined her at the edge of the garden, his presence calm and steady as always. He nodded toward the children who were busily gathering herbs, tending animals, and preparing the small fire for breakfast. "They are your family now as much as mine," he said softly. "You have nurtured them, guided them, and shared your heart with them. That is what matters." Mara's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were of joy and acceptance. She had once defined herself by what she could not have, the children she could never bear, the life she had lost. But now she understood that family was not limited to biology or circumstance. It was built through presence, care, and love, and she had found her place at its center. The children ran toward her, calling out her name. Kao clutched her hand, Layla hugged her around the waist, and even Tayan and Hakan offered shy smiles and small waves. Mara laughed, a sound full of warmth and release, and knelt to meet them at their level. She guided Kao's hands as he worked on a small garden project, praised Layla for her cleverness in building a simple toy, and shared quiet encouragement with the older boys as they labored. Each interaction reminded her that love could be given in infinite ways, and that her life now had purpose beyond her own imagination. As they worked together, Mara glanced at Ahyak, whose enigmatic smile seemed to hold a quiet pride and understanding. She realized that the children's lives were richer for having her in them, just as hers had become richer for having them. The past, The grief, the absence, the impossible dreams was still there, but it no longer dictated the course of her life. It had become part of a larger story, one that included laughter, growth, learning, and shared joy. Later, as the sun climbed higher, Mara gathered the children around for a story. She wove together elements of her own culture with the Apache tales she had learned, creating a narrative that bridged worlds and honored both traditions. The children listened, enraptured, their eyes wide with wonder and their hearts open. In that moment, Mara understood fully what Ayak had meant when he said there were enough children for both. It was not about numbers or possession. It was about love's capacity to expand, about the ability to give and receive care, about the creation of bonds that transcended bloodlines. Mara had discovered that family was not fixed. It was living, breathing, and constantly evolving. She had been given a second chance, not to replace what she had lost, but to build something new and beautiful. As the story ended and the children ran off to play, Mara stood with Ayak, watching the sunlight shimmer across the valley. She felt an overwhelming sense of peace and belonging, a quiet knowledge that her life was no longer defined by absence but by the love she shared. In that moment, Mara smiled, fully and without hesitation. She was a mother in the truest sense, not because she had given birth, but because she had nurtured, guided, and loved. She was part of a family that spanned generations and cultures, united by care, respect, and shared life. The impossible had become possible, not through what she lacked, but through what she gave. And in that new kind of family, Mara finally felt whole.